Hi, everyone, and welcome back to RayCor Intel Deep Dive, where we explore the intersection of compliance, technology, and what's next in shaping the future of compliance. I'm your host, Christina Rea, founder and CEO of RayCor Consulting. Today, we're diving into the real-world utility of AI, not just as a buzzword, but as a practical tool for the compliance community. How are platforms being built with compliance teams in mind? What AI features actually help? Where do they still fall short? Joining me today is Will Pedley, someone that I have known for quite some time and I've really enjoyed learning from over the past year. Will is the creative force behind an organization that I'm really excited to be a part of called Compliance Circle. It's a fast-growing platform designed to bring connection, community, and shared value to compliance professionals. And what makes this interview so interesting is that Will is not a chief compliance officer, and that's exactly why I think that this is such an important conversation. Will, to my knowledge, spends a lot of time actually working with AI, and probably asking the kinds of questions that, compliance officers and technologists should be asking. What do we need more of from AI as we continue to use it? What are the aspects of it that we need to build for more responsibly? How do we make these tools useful without adding noise? So we're going to talk about things like product design to how Will uses AI experimentally, what he's learned, how different tools in the industry and frameworks might start to converge. Really anything else that Will feels like sharing in terms of his experience with using AI, and then what he might be seeing in the market when it comes to emerging tech like RegTech and the overlap with AI, and his thoughts on potentially controls that, the compliance space might be able to scale. So with that, I will let Will take a moment to introduce himself.
Thanks very much, Christina, and you're happy to be here. So, as you mentioned, I've founded Compliance Circle, but for a decade, I've also run a recruitment company in the compliance space for fintech called Series B. And most recently, I've launched a new community called Loop. And so AI is a big part of my life at the moment as I try and juggle 3 different companies to run on a day-to-day basis. So it's proving a useful, sometimes frustrating, but a useful tool.
Do you feel like in order for people, regardless of their field, really, to be successful moving forward, that it's kind of inevitable that we're going to use AI in some form or fashion to help us either with day-to-day tasks, administrative stuff, or the build out or research?
Absolutely. I feel that we're already in the stage now where AI is part of our lives, and a lot of the times we don't necessarily know it. One of the areas that I've used AI in a lot is for video calls and for note taking. Whilst I'm actively, I know that I'm using AI when I do that. I think a lot of people are finding that they're on their calls, they're getting their transcripts sent straight to them within seconds, not really realizing that what's going on behind the scenes, and there's multiple more levels to it. So I certainly think that it's already playing a big role, and if you really want to understand it and harness it, then it's worth diving in. It's the hot topic. You can jump on, YouTube or LinkedIn or go to any conference. Someone somewhere is talking about it. We're talking about it today, and I think it's not a case of necessarily being left behind, but it's definitely going to take over the workplace for sure. And if you're concerned about that at all, it's worth doing a bit of research.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And that's why I was so excited to have you on this episode, because AI is such a buzzword. And I think we all, intellectually understand what it means, and we're figuring out the scale to which, it can step in, especially in the financial services ecosystem, what exactly it is capable of. But there's a lot of fear around it, in the compliance world. How do we validate it? How do we control it? Recently wrote a white paper trying to tackle some of those issues. But what I don't hear a lot of, in the compliance space, and certainly, not least of which is compliance officers don't have a lot of time, is I don't really hear a lot of people, kind of playing around with it, or trying to break it or figure out, what exactly it can do. I've heard webinars, I've participated in webinars where, people talk about it being a useful tool, but there's a lot of fear mongering around it, and rightfully so. Now, if you go onto ChatGPT and you ask it to write a paper, pull sources, citations, there's a good chance it might be wrong. So we have a lot of work to do, in our space around making sure that it's actually producing the output that we want it to. But I don't think I know anyone personally who spends as much time kind of tinkering around with it and seeing, the capabilities and the possibilities and trying to really make it work for them as much as you do. So I will dive in with a question, that I think is pretty interesting. What was your first meaningful exposure to building or using AI? Like what hooked you on it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first exposure I had was machine learning. It was IBM Watson. So IBM Watson allowed you needed some level of skill, which I didn't have, and it was taking me a long time to get my head around it, but it allowed you to create automation. And in this case, it was for chatbots. So through Series B, I was asked similar questions by a lot of people a lot of the time. And I wanted to provide a service to them whilst being able to maintain the operations of my day to day without taking too much time on it. Inevitably, I spent 3 months trying to build a chatbot I never used. So maybe I wasted that time. But that was the first time I realized the power of it was that I could control it and I could build it into something that I designed. So from there, I was hooked. And then a little later on, it was Midjourney. And I think when Midjourney started to become incredibly popular for image generation, being slightly more artistic and my dad being a photographer and being into that world, I I found it was pretty incredible. But I did also notice its limitations. And I think having grown up around a photographer, I realized that it was still in its nascent stage. That has changed somewhat. You now don't always get six fingers on a hand or, any of the sort of weird adaptations that it would consistently add. And that's something to note. It's just the speed in which it was growing at the time as an industry. And that certainly drew me in because I thought, wow, okay, there's something that you do today that you might be frustrated about will be solved within 6 months. So don't get too turned off by it. It's going to be able to do the things that you want it to do.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of us, in the space, our first, certainly my first experience is really like the RegTech platforms, companies like Sardine or Unit 21 that started talking about, smart data not all that long ago. But it sounds like, you've got a more well-rounded background with AI than just how can it, conduct investigations and help do KYC. So that leads me into another set of questions, kind of around the practical use of AI. What tools and AI platforms are you using right now? And would you say that any of them are embedded into, any day-to-day processes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I use a few. In terms of LLMs, I will use ChatGPT and Gemini. I've tried Claude. I've tried a few others, but those were the two, and I'm very aware of used on Twitter or X. But those two sort of stand out. ChatGPT, because of the entry point, or the price entry point, it was super low. So I think initially it was $20 a month. Almost every month you had a new version come out. It's incredibly powerful, and so I was using that to just to do research. I still use that today, and then I upgraded to Gemini Ultra, which was a somewhat more expensive option. And I use that for the video generation. So very recently, I created videos for Loop as part of an onboarding and also part of advertising the fact that the community had started. And I realized that today we're using Riverside to do this video, but the production value just wasn't there for me. And so I wanted to use AI. So I used Gemini Ultra to do that. That was pretty incredible. I used in the end about 8 videos from the 70 or 80 that I created. There was a lot of errors in there. So it wasn't something that I knew that I would be able to use on a regular basis. It was just for a one-off project. And then aside from LLMs, we use Fireflies every day. So that records most of my calls. We have to be wary of obviously telling people that there is an AI on the call. 99% of people are absolutely fine with that. And half the time they're using their own as well. There are others out there. I know people use AI, and I seem to discover new ones all of the time. But we actually formed a partnership with Fireflies because I thought they were going in the right direction, and it can plug into all sorts of other systems that you use. And then on the automation side, I used Zapier. I was considering, and Zapier has some limitations, but I've partnered with a content aggregator which helps us, a regulatory intelligence tool called Horizon that we produced, and I needed a way to transform that information from where it existed on their platform to ours, but also to create the design so that it just didn't turn up in plain text. And so Zapier did a wonderful job of helping there, and so we use that. That runs every single day. And then we also use Airtable, and that helps us integrate a lot of our data into platforms that are, in my opinion, a little bit more advanced than Excel. One of the advantages is on the automation side is that you can write script, and I am the furthest thing from a programmer or a coder or anything. But I used ChatGPT and Gemini together actually, and I would trade off scripts with them until I produced something where not only will it be able to take in all the information I have from my type forms, from the questionnaires that we put out there, but it will also be able to take that data and analyze it and then compare the two. So we created a matching tool through Airtable and through multiple different AIs that we now use on a day-to-day basis. So if a client reaches out to us wanting to get in touch with a compliance consultant on the platform, it's the AI that's produced that code through Airtable that's enabling us to offer a matching service.
That's so interesting. How much time, ballpark estimate, would you say that using these tools has saved you versus if you had to do the note taking, the matching with the tables, the research, the development? How much time would you say this has saved you overall in your initiatives?
Well, I mean, it saves me days a week. When you think about the note taking, the actual note taking itself, it can be a disadvantage. If you're actively writing down notes when you're taking calls, you do remember it. It's that old thing where when you're in school and you write something down on a piece of paper, you don't necessarily remember the thing that you wrote, but you know where
Hmm.
you wrote it on the piece of paper, and so you can recall it. Now that AI is doing all that for you, I do notice that I remember fewer things from those calls. Obviously, the positive is that I can then go and access that later on. And I
Hmm.
think that the thing that's saving me time there is the analysis. So I will be able to query the data and pull out the things that I need from calls that have happened over the last 6 months and say, okay, I remember someone said this. Who was it? What was said? Fine. And I obviously, because it records, sometimes people will choose video. We don't. We just choose the audio. We can get the transcript and we can get the exact wording. So that has saved me a massive amount of time. The notes that I was taking previously, I'd never be able to query that data, and some of that stuff would be lost. And as for the automations, well, there's no on earth I'd ever be able to learn that script in a short period of time. So that's probably saved me years worth of, going to school or sitting down and doing some study to try and figure that out. So that's an invaluable resource that's took me a little bit of time to do. And there was one particular script that I wanted to write that took me about a week, solid week. And I was doing maybe 15-hour days for a week just to get it right. And the joy of when it was done and it worked was quite overwhelming. I was very, very pleased it finally paid off. But now I know that it runs itself and I don't have to do anything to it. And I have a version. So even if I wanted to query it later on and change things,
Hmm.
I know that I can also, that's not only saved me time, but probably saved me a lot of money as well if I wanted to engage with someone to build that for me.
I want to dig a little deeper into, so you were talking about, ChatGPT versus Gemini, some of the platforms and tools that you have used, what you're finding to be more useful than others. How do you evaluate whether, an AI tool or model is really good enough for you to use in the production of the development, of these, multiple platforms that you're able to do now? When you're doing your market research, is this a matter of just doing the research around it, or is it a matter of going in and playing with everything and, trying to break it, see what works best? Like what have you found to be the best way to evaluate these different tools, to figure out not only which one, is maybe the most user-friendly and most efficient, but which ones maybe have the least rates of error when using them?
Yeah, great question. I would say that trial and error is the best way. You can jump on YouTube for reviews and watch people use them themselves, and that's great to an extent, but they're never solving the problem. You know, if you went into the history of everybody's ChatGPT or Gemini, every single question would be different, and I think that you need to experience that yourself. So on the coding side, I found that ChatGPT was more reliable to sort of provide the response that I wanted, but it didn't go deep enough into making it intelligent. It was only ever building what I asked it to build, and I'm not an engineer, and so in terms of the architecture that needed to be put together to actually build something that was robust, um, I needed something that was far more intelligent than I. And so when I was communicating with ChatGPT, I hit a limit constantly, but it was able to produce something fairly basic that I could use. So I found that out through after a couple of days I realized that I was sort of hitting a barrier. So then I went to Gemini and I just took everything that I had from ChatGPT and I dumped it in there and said, what do you think of it? And zero context. What do you think of this? And it offered me all these solutions, and it started to do a lot of my thinking for me that I just wouldn't have been able to do. And I think that's probably the best way to test out any of these, is to compare them. On the image generation, on the video generation, I found that Gemini Ultra and Flow that they have as their video tool was far superior to anything that, say, like ChatGPT had. Sora, which ChatGPT have as their image generation tool, was far superior to anything that Gemini had, which it's called like and or something like that. That might be the name of the pharma company in Jurassic Park, or it could be the name of the one in Gemini. I'm not sure, but it's probably the issue is that some of these do things that I always do poorly, and vice versa. You can't really find a complete package. So you'll probably find most people who are diving into this are using multiple tools and just trying their best to find the one that works. And if you are an expert in that particular area, you're probably going to notice the flaws quicker than somebody else, of course. But I don't think there's a better solution than just diving in and trying to figure it out.
I didn't know that you could run ChatGPT and Gemini together in tandem. How exactly does that work?
Well, so they're not integrated, but you can. So, for example, with a Gemini, you can do this thing called deep research. And so that really does dive in. It's on this. They've got multiple versions, and it's on the higher version. And what I would do is I'd say, okay, this is the subject I want to. This is the solution I want to solve or I want to find, and I'd put that into the deep research, and then I would say to that, right, okay, I need that in a file, and I would literally lift it into a file, and then I dump that straight into ChatGPT. I'm fairly sure there are ways that you can use automations for the two to connect. And I've yet to explore that, and I think this verges on agentic AI, which I think has its own issues, which is, can you trust an AI to go and do something on its own and prompt itself? And I don't think I'm quite there yet. I've had recently, ChatGPT have introduced a few new areas that would allow you to do that, which I think they've called agent. And it will allow them to do things like booking flights, for example, and it can study the flights for a few days and then find the best price and book you a flight. And that might be like the entry level. But I think for what I was looking to do, the problem is if you don't know what the input is, it's going to be nigh on impossible to figure out where the errors happen. So the way that they integrate with me is that I just download the files and I just input them separately into the other.
Okay. And you feel so far that Gemini does a better job doing more of a deep dive than ChatGPT?
Yeah. So behind both of them is this sort of inbuilt personality that they've put, which is essentially we want to please the user. It's gamification, so they want to make sure that for whatever you say, there is an answer.
Hmm.
And I found that with the deep research, it's not interested in just providing you any old answer to appease you. It will actually go into, I mean, sometimes it's pages and pages of things that you're probably never really going to read in detail, but it is going out there to try and find you the most factual information. Whereas day-to-day usage on ChatGPT, you very quickly notice that it is just going to provide you an answer, whether it's right or wrong or it's related at all. It's just going to provide you an answer. And that can become incredibly frustrating. And I've had many conversations with ChatGPT where it's, I wouldn't ever want to post those. But I find that's where Gemini maybe had the advantage, was it would just go away and try and find a solution. And it's the quick back and forth that neither of them are better at. I would say maybe the format of Gemini is I prefer, because it tends to reply in paragraphs, and so I'm sort of reading the information as a human being rather than reading it as another AI, where because ChatGPT tends to give you lots of sort of bullet points and graphs and data and stuff like that, which when I'm trying to understand a topic, it doesn't help me as much. It may help somebody else. So I prefer Gemini. But recently I found that Gemini had issues with getting stuck in loops. And this is a problem with all AI.
Mm-hmm.
And this then verges on prompt engineering, which I'm sure we can talk about. Um, you need to be able to break them out of the loop to be able to use them. And ChatGPT is quite easy to break out of loops, and Gemini is nigh on impossible. I went for 30 or 40 back and forths, and it would send me the exact same code snippet every single time, regardless of what I asked it. And then it started to answer questions 3 questions prior. It's like a game show of some sort of comedy where I was asking a question and it was answering one from 5 minutes ago. And that's when you start to realize you're wasting your time. And you have to sort of make a judgment call of going, okay, I'm probably just going to do this, or I'm not going to do this project, or I'm going to go and try and do this manually, because you then find that your time is actually just being spent on trying to figure out how the AI works and not actually on the results that it can produce.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And I do in a few minutes want to go into your use of AI and where you might have come across hallucinations, biases, or errors, and how you discovered that that was the case, and what you've done to ameliorate that. But you mentioned a term, that's thrown about a lot, prompt engineering, and I would love to get your definition on what that is. Overall, I think the majority of people sort of understand that, but a lot of people don't understand that. They know they'll, go into an AI and type something out, but they don't know that there's ways to really get more of the information that, you're looking for, like you were saying, at a deeper level, or pulling it out of a loop. It does tend to get stuck in these loops of maybe giving you the same answer, or it's almost like it gets frustrated with itself because its goal is to please you. And when it can't figure out to do that, in typical robot fashion, it starts to break down a bit. So could you, for the audience, maybe give just a quick definition of prompt engineering, what resources you have found that have been useful in learning how to work with this, and maybe what platforms you think have been most amenable to what different kinds of prompts that you use?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's immensely important to be able to communicate what you want to convey to an AI, and it doesn't always understand you. And companies like Gemini and Google for Gemini have produced white papers on this. You can go and download the best. And if you go onto Twitter, constantly every other day, somebody is posting a helpful description of how to best communicate to get a certain result. So um, like with anything, if you were coding, there are certain syntax, certain phrases that you will use in order for the code to understand what you're trying to do. Whether it's something as simple as a line break, for example. And it's the same with AI. They've built it very quickly, but I don't think it's quite ready for public consumption yet. In as much as that it's far more advanced than we are. And so I found that with prompt engineering, the best way to describe it is a way to communicate with AI so that AI knows what it's doing, and not necessarily you know what it's doing. So, for example, I mentioned earlier about it was getting stuck in these loops. I turned around to Gemini, and once I got it to respond to me, I said, "What is it I can say to you that stops you doing the thing that you're doing?" And then it would give me a few prompts, and it would say, if you say these words, I will stop doing what I'm doing. So I wrote these words out and I copied and pasted exactly what it said back to it. And it said, okay, thanks very much. I will try and find another solution to solve this problem. The reason why I mentioned earlier that I find ChatGPT is better is that ultimately I then went through another 10 messages where it didn't really do that. It did it for one message and it didn't carry on. So prompt engineering is trial and error again. There is no sort of perfect solution for it. And I'm fairly sure most LLMs are built with sort of differing tools that you can use to communicate. But I find that ChatGPT seems, to me anyway, seems to be the most intuitive. But what I would recommend to people is to ask the LLM itself, how is it best I communicate with you? I want to produce this. What are the best prompts I can use to make sure that you do that? It's absolutely not a waste of time to communicate with it the way that it wants to be communicated to. And it's certainly the best use. What I would imagine is most people, the reason why they get so frustrated is because they are trying to tell it to do something. And it is not a human being. It is not reading your phrase exactly as you are saying it.
Mhm.
It's picking out common words. It's picking out meaning, and it's trying to define what that meaning is itself. So it's not prompt engineering is it is a science. You've got to keep testing it, and you've got to get it right. But it's definitely not the same for every single product.
Yeah, that's I was on a webinar once where the guy who was talking about AI, and again, it was specific to compliance officers, but he was explaining a little bit of prompt engineering, and if your goal is to try to figure out, is this narrative for a SAR something that is audit quality, if FinCEN were to review it, you ask it to try, looking at certain things through different lenses or putting on different hats, look at this, narrative through the lens of a FinCEN regulator. Is there anything missing? Is there anything we would want in there that's not there that you would come back and ask us for? Anything that you would red flag? And I thought that was so interesting, because the way the human brain is thinking is exactly what you were saying. I'm asking it a question and I'm not getting the answer that I'm looking for. And I've even thought to do that sometimes where I've thought, I've asked it a question and then I've thought, put on the hat of a regulator, maybe a PR person, for some of my own content. What would a PR person tell me to do or to focus on to, really make a piece of content pop or be punchy? And then the responses that come back are much richer and deeper. So, I think to the extent people are actually, using prompt engineering, my fellow consultants, people building things, this is going to get you results deeper than just going on and kind of asking it base level questions. It doesn't seem to have the, capability of understanding how to take it deeper and be more nuanced, unless
Yeah,
you specifically are kind of saying that.
absolutely. And I think that what you want to be doing is taking more time. And I think with these LLMs, the sense is that it's giving you quick results and you can go and learn something very quickly. But actually, if you don't use it as a time saver, but you use it as an accuracy tool, then you can say things to it and say, write back to me what you think I'm asking you, in other words. And you'll very quickly realize whether or not it's on the right track. And then what you've said as well is like, oh, act as if you are a regulator, or might act as if you're an MLRO or something. If you narrow its field, it's trained on so much data. And if you can try and narrow its field so it doesn't start going off on tangents, you will definitely get better results. I've certainly found that. And I often will say, particularly when I was writing the script, and I said, look, I don't want you to act as a programmer, I want you to act as an architect.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise you're just producing your code. But I want you to design this thing. I want you to go a level higher. And then almost instantly, I started to get better results. But I could have gone on for weeks, and because I'm not a programmer, it would have been building probably very very simple code, and I would not have known. So
Right.
that was quite important.
Yeah. I guess a lot of this is definitely trial and error. But in my space, we talk about the core risks of AI. And, anyone that wants to learn more about those, you can check out my white paper. It'll be published in the newsletter where you'll be seeing this interview as well, making the black box accountable. And one of the things I get into is the core risks that are being enumerated in various pieces of guidance out there. And some of those risks are things like bias. How do you ensure? Obviously, your tool is going to be biased towards you. It's going to tell you what you want to hear to be happy. But, in addition to companies that are using tools for things like credit and lending decisions, whoever built the tool, there might be some implicit bias in there. And how would you necessarily know without these kinds of checks? So, Will, for someone like you that's actively using the tool, have you come across some of these risks, a bias or a hallucination or a drift, where it tends to kind of get away from what you're asking it for and you have to bring it back in line? Maybe you've been working on a tedious project where you're asking it to, look up something in every state, and after 20 states it starts to drift and the code it was giving you is all of a sudden it's giving you something you didn't ask for and you're like, wait a minute, what happened here? We were in a good rhythm. What are some interesting instances of how you've come across that? How did you catch it? And then what did you do next to try to fix it?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the early discoveries was when the ChatGPT was only updated until October 2023 or something. And if you were asking it up to the minute information, at the time, it didn't have the ability to search the web. And so I didn't realize at the time that October 2023 was the cutoff. And so it was giving me this information. And only after a certain time did I realize that that wasn't accurate. And I can't quite remember what it was, but it was an area that that I knew myself. And so going back, I had to say, well, no, I need more up-to-date information. And it was just too limited. And so I had to then realize that it just was not the tool to be used. You just had to go old school and figure something out. More recently, I was using an AI chatbot, which had been designed um, on AML data. And so it was an AML chatbot, and I was asked if I could test it out. And so you're mentioning about you're working through regulations on 50 different states and so forth. And I know, of course, there's a bit license, and there's crypto licenses in California. And I said, oh, if I were a company and I was to go through one of these processes, what would you recommend would be included in one of my policies? And it wrote back to me and said, well, this hasn't happened yet, but I know there are discussions, and California will soon be doing this thing. I was like, no, 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 we're way further down the line than that. And
Hmm.
it just refused to give me that information in all of the results, because what I was doing was I was taking that and then I was putting it into another LLM to sort of test it out. In all of the results, it refused. And then when I eventually asked it, it said, oh, I'm sorry, I was basing it on my trained data, even though I was telling it not to. It wouldn't use the internet. It would constantly go back to its trained data. And these are errors that if you're not looking out for that, in particular, if you're not in the compliance world, and if you went onto something like this and said, okay, I need an AML policy, this is my business, and this is what we're doing, you just would not know if you don't know what you're looking for. And that's a huge risk. And so I know that there's lots of people building tools that aim to not necessarily replace compliance officers, but that is kind of how they're advertised, is that you can reduce headcount because, hey, you've got this agent with them. But there was a piece written by Josh Deeks recently. And part of that was that even if you train something on a specific set of data, there's no guarantee that that AI will actually pick the right data point to respond to you correctly. It could certainly still pick the wrong one. And again, I mean, some of this goes back to prompt engineering, but it's also that the complexity of these LLMs is so great that you just do not have any control over it. And over maybe the last 6 months or so, I've been exploring new tools to build, and it's certainly been communicated that the best, most expensive way, but the best way to go about building an AI agent is to build your own LLM, not build on top of one, because otherwise you get all the sort of inherent bias that exists within ChatGPT, which I've already mentioned, is gamification, is to please someone, is just to give you a response. And so I've had almost every other day, it will give me some incorrect information. Another area that I use AI for is to create SEO content. So in every single website, you want to be able to appear slightly further up the Google searches and so forth. And it's immensely difficult to do that, to get off the ground. And so the best way that you're trained to do it is to create content that's forever changing on your platform, which has the keywords, the SEO terms, so that you start to appear further up. And that's why almost everybody has a blog page on their website, and nobody ever really goes there and reads it. The reasons for that is for SEO. And I was using ChatGPT to help me write some articles. And then but I wasn't posting them yet because our blog page is public. A lot of other people's is hidden somewhere, so you can't really access it. And I certainly, as a compliance community, didn't want to be posting anything that wasn't factual. So what I did was I created my own AI agent to validate the data that I was given. And then I created another AI agent to rewrite the content if there were any errors. And that was one of the only solutions I could come up with. Even so, once you get your final piece, I still think you need a human in the loop to read through these things. I would not trust AI end to end. I think the hallucinations will just get greater because of the amount of disinformation that exists online.
That's a really interesting point. Some of the people that I've spoken with who work at the really big consulting companies, the big four, FTI Consulting, they have clients that are utilizing AI, asking for assistance and implementing it. And in terms of controls and what advice are the bigger consultants giving in terms of controlling this, the number one control I hear all of the time is human in the loop. There is no way around it. I think at this point in time, I think everyone who utilizes it or is thinking through is in agreement. I'm certain the regulators would agree at this point in time. It has so much utility, but to your point, it has a long way to go to be reliable. There's someone who gave me a piece of advice when I first started talking about AI, trust but verify. And he has since updated that advice. I forget what it was, but it was like no longer trust, just verify. And I have found that to be true. I've gone and tried to find quick links to citations and it's incorrect. Something as simple as maybe pulling the contact info for the, whatever the Texas Department of Banking, or every state has something different, and it couldn't give me the correct address. And I just thought, geez, it's, maybe it's a good starting point. It can certainly get you on the right track, but we do still need that human to review everything. So, one of the questions that's constantly coming up is, is AI going to take our jobs? I don't think anyone's in danger of that anytime soon, but I think AI will change what jobs will look like, and it will become more a matter of, verification, learning how to govern it, learning, how the model works, how can it break, how can we intervene to ensure that it's producing what it needs to produce and that it's accurate, because there's nothing more embarrassing than relying on it, producing a piece of work and then it's incorrect.
I agree. I think AI governance and model validation, they will be well-paid careers over the next 10, 15 years. Because I don't think we won't get, but I don't think we want perfect AI, because even naturally, we are growing teams, we're hiring people. We don't let those people just do whatever they want for a year. You will check in as often as you can just to make sure that what they are doing is, what the company wants or what you want or what the project needs. And I don't think that we could trust AI end to end. And ultimately, it's only as good as the data that gets put into it. And human error means that a lot of the data that gets put into these things is inaccurate anyway. So for you to have, you would need ultimately a level of trust. But I don't think that that level of trust is ever going to be to the stage where you just say, right, okay, this is going to run end to end and there is going to be no human in the loop. It's just not going to happen. So it was certainly enhance people's roles. I think anybody who was pre-AI is going to be invaluable. And anybody who's joining the workforce now will definitely have to learn what the capabilities of AI is, but they will need mentors. They will need to work with anybody who was there prior. Because if you're in the position of relying on these things, you're going to find yourself in trouble in a pretty short order.
Great news for those that are worried about losing their jobs, and great news for those that are going to be coming into the workforce that will need jobs and skills. Definitely pay attention and start learning more about data science, model validation, and the interplay in my world with compliance, but whatever industry you're getting in, how that human in the loop control will be invaluable. Well, we got to wrap up in a second, but I think as a closing question, what's one piece of advice that you would give to an AI enthusiast, an AI builder, to make sure that they stay aligned, with accountability as they build out, as they scale, as they dive into this interesting world and start learning and doing a lot of the research that you have already done?
I would say the one bit of advice is to go into it not thinking that you're going to change the world with it. If you treat AI as it is today, as a tool that can be a colleague, a co-founder, a wall to bounce ideas off, you will very quickly improve the framework of your business, the ability to communicate with your clients and your audience. But if you bury your head in the sand and say, right, okay, this standalone product is going to change the world, it won't. There's the advancement of AI is so quick, it will probably be obsolete within 6 months anyway. So I would say try and use AI incrementally into your day to day to solve small problems and grow with it, and not hope that it replaces you.
I think that is a great piece of advice to end on. Will, thank you so much for joining me today. I really love talking with people who are building cool things and actually thinking critically about how those things are going to land in whatever various space, they're being introduced in. This world, needs a lot more of those critical thinkers. If you are listening and curious about some of the topics we covered today, from explainability to how AI tools can actually support compliance work, as mentioned before, you can check out my new white paper, Making the Black Box Accountable. You can find it at raycorconsulting.com. It'll also be in my newsletter, and you can find it on my LinkedIn page, which is under Christina Rea Baxter. And if you're interested in learning more about Will's groups, Compliance Circle or Loop, Will, what's the best place for people to reach you?
Jump straight onto LinkedIn and you can message me. I respond to everybody.
Yeah, he's pretty good about that. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll be back soon with another episode of RayCor Intel Deep Dive. And until then, keep asking the smart questions and stay sharp. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Christina.